So, digital sovereignty really is about how people, communities, and nations get to decide how to design, deploy, and also develop tools based on their terms, their values, their priorities.
The promise and pitfalls of AI are everywhere, while real inclusion seems to be missing entirely. What if digital sovereignty mattered more than profit, and true AI diversity wasn't just a buzzword, but a blueprint? Today we're diving into the stories and breakthroughs that challenge who shapes AI, whose voices are heard, and how the next billion users are redefining what tech truly values.
Welcome to Socially Conscious AI, where we explore the cutting-edge innovations transforming our world for the better and bring you conversations with the brilliant minds and ethical pioneers who are leveraging AI's power to address humanity's most important challenges. I'm Valencio Cardoso.
And I'm Roman Burkott, and today we welcome Payal Arora, Professor and Chair of Inclusive AI Cultures at Utrecht University, and co-founder of the Inclusive AI Lab and FimLab. Dubbed a Next Billion Champion by Forbes, her work spans 2 decades of research on digital life in the Global South. She's the award-winning author of The Next Billion Users and From Pessimism to Promise. And she was named one of the 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics. Payal advises UN agencies and tech giants alike on building AI that's diverse, sovereign, and downright useful for the world's majority. Payal, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, and lovely to be here.
I think just to kind of start off with, right, I want to kind of focus a little bit on your latest book, right? Pessimism to Promise and Optimism from the Global South. And it sort of flips tech pessimism on its head. And I think the part that I'm most interested in is like, what do you feel is so important about the Global South? And can you share a story where like a grassroots innovation shows like a promising narrative or, something that showcases optimism?
Yeah, so basically, I was driven to write this book because, as you mentioned, Roman, that I've been working in the field. I've been basically working into understanding how young people make sense of digital tools in their everyday life, and particularly those at the margin, which is the majority. So, slums in India to favelas in Brazil or townships in South Africa. It's like basically they are the majority world where these are young people who are really, despite the odds, are absolutely crazily enthusiastic about technology. And I think that's really what affected me because I live in Amsterdam, I live in Europe, and obviously I engage a lot in the US, and I also spent 15 years there. And what I noticed over the last few years, particularly, is there's a significant growing divide between the West, which is increasingly getting pessimistic, including, by the way, Silicon Valley, too. You see all these tech evangelists saying, oh my God, what have I done? I built a hashtag. It's ruining democracy, but don't you worry, I'm going to fix it. So I mean, that's very different, right? From like decades ago when the, internet came about and everyone's like, we're going to have one hell of a time and you get your hands off the internet. And so the West is becoming increasingly pessimistic towards all things digital, AI, the world in general. And it's almost to a point of impotence, like hopelessness. And then you have the rest of the world, which is becoming super optimistic. I work with people like in Ethiopia who are like on cocaine of optimism, so they're like, oh my God, the best thing on the planet. I'm like, hey, can we get a little more critical here? But part of the thing is understanding why. Is it ignorance? Is it that they're not there yet? And absolutely not. My book is basically countering all these like myths of why this optimism, pessimism divide, and truly getting to the heart of the matter is what is going on with the Global South? Why are they super excited about these tools, despite the fact that the harms and risks are disproportionately felt by them, right? And if we can get to the kernel of the truth there, we can understand where the future of AI is going to go, right?
Where do you think the future of AI is going to go?
I think let's go by the granular in terms of who are these people and why they're excited, right? So maybe like a couple of stories. Well, if you are a homosexual man, for example, in Uganda, it is criminal to be, homosexual to a point of death. actually 26 different countries criminalizes homosexuality. So your in-person realities are really constraining because you can't self-actualize, right? So in comparison, basically you can go online and really actually be more of yourself despite the risks and harms, right? And this goes for Afghanistani women, right, who actually are not even allowed to go to school, go into public spaces or into salons. It's a complete like medieval time, basically. So, in relation to their lived experiences, right? The technologies seem so much more enabling. And then we see the rise of AI is allowing protest groups, whether against cartels to, against like Iranian regime and elsewhere, because less than 13% of the world's population live in liberal democracies. And what these people are doing is they're using AI to generate videos and deep fake audios of their stories, and are able to make it very visceral without putting real people in harm's way, for example. Very creative, right? All people or communities are using it to generate, content which actually can really build a sort of momentum towards social change because it's very labor intensive. The average creator is spending 8 to 10 hours. So AI is really enabled and in multiple languages, by the way, because many of these people don't know English, but they know that's the way to go viral. So now with AI, it is a complete game changer in being able to reach a wider audience than ever before to make your niche cause a global cause. And so when we start to think about that, and you start to look at these multiple movements, it actually becomes the majority of reasons, right? And so I think that's why people get so excited.
Yeah, yeah, because AI has been democratized now, especially with ChatGPT and like the foundational LLMs coming about, right? And making that more accessible for people. And what I'm hearing there is everybody has a cause that they can now amplify, or, it makes it more tangible for them to get that word out there about their realities.
Exactly. Right. I mean, we can even go more mundane. Like the creator economy is driven by young people. And if you recognize and, remind yourself that 90% of the world's population are young people who live outside the West, that is the majority world. And they fast come online, right? They are the next billion users. In fact, not only is the digital divide like, reducing in many ways, and I'm not like undermining the struggles that still need to, be met in terms of the last mile. But, many ways it's a game changer. Like the mobile
Mhm.
internet, right, is cheaper in many parts of the global south than in the north in many ways. So if you look at the countries that have the cheapest mobile internet, it's India, China, Indonesia, Cambodia, Israel, etc. So also fintech, they're like a decade ahead of, say, the US. I mean, they can't believe America still uses checks. Like, I mean, it seems so dinosaurish. And so for them to hear, you know, um, tech evangelists talking about AI for good and how they're going to bring, financial inclusion to East Asia, it's like, are you out of your mind? You are the ones writing checks. If we want financial inclusion, we learn from south to south. We will, learn from China and other East Asian countries and what are they doing, and India. We're not going to learn from the US on how to become financially included. So I think there's a different kind of momentum of, energy that things are different. And it's not so much, I mean, we are getting very fast there. It's a question about what does it mean to be, to have your own space, this whole sovereignty.
So you were starting to touch on this idea of digital sovereignty, which I think is one of your key areas of focus. Can you define that for us? What does it mean to have digital sovereignty?
So, digital sovereignty really is about how people, communities, and nations get to decide how to design, deploy, and also develop tools based on their terms, their values, their priorities. So not only do they have a seat at the table, they get to actually dictate how this goes about, right? Which translates to very concrete questions of where are the data centers, how much energy is this going to be used, whose language, cultures, values gets to be, embedded in the way in which we shape our data sets. What are these golden data sets that are shaping the normative, And so these are the kind of questions that are being asked, which is actually pretty cool because they get to actually be much more included in the ways in which they get to be seen and heard, using these AI tools.
We are talking about digital sovereignty, including things like the infrastructure. I think an example of that might be something like Meta, as I understand it, is laying undersea cables. Do you see that as like just them entering a market, or is that somehow a public good?
So this is very tricky, right? So, it's interesting because I've been talking to some African intellectuals in Europe who are very pessimistic, but they are sitting in Europe and, they've been here for like decades and they are like saying, oh my God, there's no hope. Africa is again recolonized because we have no control. It's again, there you go. Americans are building the infrastructures and are strangleholding, like, much of Africa. If I speak to many Africans, African politicians, leaders, we are actually heading to Pretoria next year, and we're going to be engaging with a lot of like stakeholders from across board, policymakers, tech entrepreneurs, etc. And they are very, very optimistic, and it's part of the reality check. They're rational optimists because look, uh, it requires an extraordinary amount of capital, right, to set up these infrastructures. And this is not an altruistic act because just because a company X, which happens to be, okay, I shouldn't say X because that could be literally Twitter, which is also, true. But company, like you said, Meta or any of these, Google, a lot of them are entering, the usual suspects are entering these spaces, right? And that's just one part of the game. Do you have the regulations in place which can make sure that these infrastructures work for you, right? So that is also a sort of a look, because we don't live in isolation and it's not charity. I think that's the most important thing. This is not AI for good. This is a mutual beneficial, enterprise. And I think that's very, very essential. If Meta frames it as AI for good, basically it could be very damaging because altruism allows them to get out of treating them as real customers, treating this as not charity, but as a business deal, right? With politicians, with saying, listen, we build the infrastructures, but what do we get? Well, you get a lot of, data because majority of young people are living in the African continent, and that is the future of the youth in, a decade from now. But how do you treat that data? How do you treat these people? Do you treat them as data points to be used and then extract and then you build tools anyway for the US? No, or see them as viable, legitimate markets. I think this is a problem is Silicon Valley doesn't quite still see them as real, legitimate markets. So I've seen this happening across board. You have the best UX researchers in India and elsewhere staying up at night, still examining and talking to American customers because they still don't see India as a legitimate market.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things I was thinking about, like as you're talking, right, is this whole diversity versus scalability paradox, right? And like when it comes to big AI, they love to scale, right? And then on the flip side, inclusion loves content. Where do you see like these tensions breaking things, and like, is there a solution for this, or how do you fix this?
Yeah, I think one of the big issues is we keep positioning diversity against scalability. For years now, I've been working with a lot of companies in Silicon Valley and beyond who are always saying, hey, you're doing interesting work and all, but how do we scale this, right? How is it viable? Is it feasible? I mean, and the thing is, what we're trying to do is we're trying to, one, it could be about building your golden data sets, which are much more diverse, right? Can you use that as a benchmark? Because they are indifferent to how diverse that is. For them, it's efficiency is not in terms of diversity, and diversity creates a robustness, which allows it to be much more agile across different cultural contexts. Because if your tool is not as, effective in different parts, they're not going to be used, period. So it's not an altruistic cause. It's not like, oh, do good, or it's not political, especially in today's times, right? That inclusion, diversity. In fact, I think my entire profile is like problematic, right? It's more like it's just common sense. Do you want your tools to work in different cultural contexts? Do you see them as viable markets? Of course they are. And secondly, the reason it worked in the past was because you didn't have competition, because that could be an argument. Say, hey, listen, we didn't really diversify and we scaled around, but that's because the global south was different. Decades ago, they hadn't yet become, you know, who they are right now. They are a very different force. Look at what's happening with the BRICS. There is a sort of a geopolitical momentum of data sharing, open source, etc., innovations from below, thinking in data light terms. And so it's a different ball game today, and we shouldn't underestimate that.
I know you do a lot of work like with your inclusive AI lab. What are some of like the methods that you're thinking about for balancing like local data richness with global model like efficiency, for example?
Yeah, so we just finished a really cool project with Adobe where we were trying to diversify their data sets, and we worked with different communities in India and on how they see themselves visually. Because if you do Indian women, for example, and you see hyper stereotypes and also of a particular region, right? So we did all these sort of interesting action research work where communities got to prompt, and they got really frustrated with these tools because there was some like it just didn't compute. Or disability groups where hearing aids became earrings, or like Indian women became like the saris, the jewelry, it was all over the place, which basically signaled that the audience is actually the Western audience, because a Western audience will see, yeah, that's Indian women. So that's legitimate because they have a sari, they have a bindi. So surely they're Indian women. But if you want this to be used, say, by third party vendors for, say, if I'm a jewelry store owner, right? And I want to sell jewelry during Diwali, I look at these images and I'm like, shit, I can't use any because this is a sari from Kerala. This is a jewelry from the north, from Bihar, and nobody would wear this combination of stuff. So I can't even use this for advertising. I can't use this for my campaigning. I can't do any of this stuff. So I need to do it myself. It basically becomes unusable material. Or you talk to disability groups, which you're doing, and they don't just prompt in generics like, oh, a wheelchair. They prompt by brand. And so the brands are in house. Like, what are the different brands that they actually value? And so, by not recognizing this, and also hairstyles, they care about hair. And so when we reach these markets, you think, oh, come on, like we have this sort of double standards. But actually, it's a huge opportunity when we let go of these double standards. Because right now, what are we trying to do? We're trying to figure out, how do we make this into a sustainable business model, right? Because right now it's all venture capital funding. Like at some point, it's going to dry up. And also that model itself is problematic, right? Because the US can afford like Amazon style, like making losses for decades, but the rest of the world, absolutely not. You need to hit the ground running. And you see that already happening with, say, Angami in the Middle East, which is a music platform which has already overtaken Spotify because it hit the ground running. It redesigned what music platforms are. And it started to, like, it doesn't have world music. It literally came. What does that actually even mean, right? Like, it's American music, which is so, like, genre, and then there are world music, the rest of the world, right? And they've already disrupted those curational categories, and they've overtaken it. So I think it's a recognition that you have genuine competition. That's a wake up call, and applied matters because that's the future of AI. It's not just who has built the tool, it's how it's applied and where the users are. And that's the majority world.
Those are some great examples of how being inclusive isn't just the right thing to do, but could have very specific financial benefits and rewards for the companies and the innovators that engage in it. But I think beyond just classic incentives, that there's also the topic of governance that's really important. I believe you've laid out care principles, CARE. Is that something you could expand on for us?
So principles are basically a sort of a counterforce to FAIR principles that computer scientists use, right? Which actually is about testing whether this data has, meets the quality standards, right? And so it's much more instrumental. And we're saying, well, can we go beyond it and look in terms of, collective benefit, whether it's ethical use, right? So yeah, about authenticity. So K as collective, A as authenticity, right? And so each of these principles are about like empathetic and engaging to a broader public. And so basically, it is very much feminist principles, which is drawn from indigenous practices. Because actually, we worked with two of our lab members. One is from indigenous Ecuador. So she's actually born and brought up there. And now she's working with us here. And the other is from Kenya, who was in an indigenous community there. And she's also out here. And so it's very interesting for them to actually sort of also be part of this. So we are a women-led and also global South-led, group. But what's actually exciting is that we also are navigating these worlds between the North and the South. We move across these borders, and we know the language, and we also have ties to the ground because we're trying to like leverage on this privilege that we have, where we happen to be, in direct access to power brokers. So, how do you build care principles into design and deployments through equity-based approaches? And not, I don't even want to go again into this sort of American style politics because I know. Look, we are in Europe, and I think every time you bring up these terms, it becomes hot button issues. But I want to bring it down to earth and say, no, this just makes things more usable. I mean, I don't care what your political spectrum is. I really don't care.
So just touching on like, multilingual, multiculturalism, and like LLMs in general, and even now, like that's becoming more mainstream with like Apple's latest announcement with their new headphones. Like it does real time translations, so it would translate what people are speaking in another language into your own language, right? But at the same time, like LLMs remain largely like monolingual and Western. So what does a truly plural model require from either a data collection or like just an evaluation perspective?
Yeah, so, it's not just the languages and dialects, it's also the ways in which we speak. So, again, I would like tap into the basest, desire of just making a profit, right? Like, I don't, like, say, I really don't care shit about the world. I just want to make money. Fine. Okay. I'll relate to that. But then, you know what? It's like if you want to understand how kids speak, they may be speaking English, but they have different ways of speaking. So they can speak in ways that are incomprehensible. All communities are like tribes which have come up with their own form of communicating and ways of expression, right? And there's a deliberateness to that. And so if AI doesn't tap into the versatility of, the ways in which we communicate, then it won't be able to scale. And this is my point. So if we can do that, which is basically older generations tend to speak in different terms. I know my dad always thinks LOL is lots of love, right? And he always signs LOL on, and then he said, and then he puts his full name, right? Like, so, and that's, legitimate. That's how it was, right? And if, so if we look at generations and also the elderly group is absolutely ignored and look at it, they are growing and they also have a lot of capital like including in Europe, in fact especially Europe, right? So if we can cater to age, we can cater to different kind of creator communities to there's also different kinds of spaces, sectors, right? So even in sectors people speak differently. We speak in jargon and everyone has their own jargon. So if you can do that, then surely you can do the rest of the world, right?
Pyle, one of the things that I feel makes your work so strong is that you bring really excellent storytelling. It's always really cool to listen to the way you relay these stories of the things you've seen. For our audience, I'm curious, like, do you have a story that we can take with us that we could relay to other people to kind of encapsulate these issues in a way that can help the idea spread?
Yeah, actually, I do. Look, so one of the things that I was most intrigued by is that every time I go into communities, so for example, I spent like 3 years in Brazil, like on a Brazilian project with refugees from Venezuela, and we were looking at privacy and data privacy and what are their concerns, and it came down to romance, sex, intimacy, because these are teenagers. So every time I'm trying to, then I was doing research on gig work in South Asia, Africa, Bangladesh. And again, we're looking at gig work and it comes down to sex, sexuality. It's like, it seems like all pathways come to sex. And then, I was thinking, of course, these are teenagers. Do we not remember how we were when we were a teen? And if we think about some hard stats, 98% of young people in the world will have an arranged marriage, right? So basically, what's happening is that they don't get the experience, and the majority of the world live in very conservative societies that are constantly watched. So these people, young people, are basically don't have an opportunity to actually have a real in-person dating experience. It's just not a thing. You can't do that in the Middle East. You can't do that in South Asia and most parts of the world. So what do? They get online. They use AI tools to translate. They have full-blown online relationships. They're, Indian guys in slums say, hey, I heard Brazilian girls will accept my invite. And I'm like, how do you communicate with them? Oh, we use Google Translate. This is, by the way, we've been doing, yeah. So they were like, and then they had fights and makeups, and then they're like, yeah, I'm well experienced, ready to go in an arranged marriage because I've had many girlfriends. I'm like, have you ever met them? No, but it doesn't matter, and it's a whole different genre. Or like in Saudi Arabia, they were playing it out on Twitter, in Twitter Messenger, to a point. By the they would take, and this is even before it got liberal, right? We're talking about like years ago. I was doing this thing, research, and they would take the risk, girls would take the risk of showing their face as a form of like, I love you. Because that's saying I'm putting trust in you because you could report me to the morality police and I can really get into trouble. And I don't know anything about you. And oftentimes these relationships would lead, and he's like, okay. And then he would propose and he would come over. So that was a very interesting. So there was this whole romance economy. And I'm not also romanticizing it, by the way, because of course, with that, there's a lot of romance scams and, but there's also this deep sense of loneliness. We are missing 60 to 80 million girls between India and China alone, right? Because of the female
Mhm.
bias. So what do these boys do? They'll never get a marriage because a lot of these boys will never be able to get married because it's just not, they're not enough girls. Not only that, girls have delaying or not actually wanting to get married because of the patriarchal culture, and they're progressing and getting jobs. So that makes it even worse a situation for the boys. So they actually have, AI related romances. They have, they are very, very eager. It's like, and there's a lot of mockery on news media saying, oh my God, did you see that this Japanese man married an AI, avatar, whatnot? And without unrecognizing why are these drivers? And romance and in fact, porn is the single biggest gateway to the internet. There is no question about it. And I think we pretend otherwise because actually I do this a lot when I go around giving talks. I ask, I was in Copenhagen Festival and I love to do that because I ask people, how many of you do not watch porn? And you see the hand raise and then they're like, hmm. And so, because then they, and the psychology. And I remember like I was giving these sort of leadership seminars in this big telecom company in Latin America. And they like came up to me and they're like, you really woke me up because it's so true. And it's like, I was like, oh my God, there's another boring leadership seminar. But it's like, you're right. Like we majority of our data is used for porn and sex and all that, but we don't share that because if we share that with policymakers here, they will like kick us out. So it's like the elephant in the room. It's a open secret that majority of the data is for that. And so I think if we just own it, that, hey, guess what? We're human. We need intimacy, that we have some serious issues in getting intimacy. And this is not like, oh my God, this is destroying our relationships. This is sustaining and helping us cope, given the fact that we may not actually have real relationships which are meaningful, and we all kind of take it for granted.
Where is sort of the best place for folks to just learn more about you and like stay connected to the work that you're doing?
LinkedIn is a good way, because I've kind of pared down my socials. So I've got out of Twitter slash X, and Instagram is more personal. So I think LinkedIn is a fantastic way. That's where we also put our Inclusive AI Lab, and we are constantly having updates. So, I would also follow that. And that's a great way for us to all build a community where we can actually do this much more at a scalable way.
Thanks for being part of Socially Conscious AI. If today's journey opened your eyes to new possibilities or challenged how you see inclusion and innovation, hit subscribe and connect with our growing community of mindful AI builders. Know someone facing tough questions about ethical tech or striving for more joyful, inclusive AI? Pass this episode along. They might discover a breakthrough they've been hoping for. For Valencio Cardoso, I'm Roman Burkhardt. As always, stay curious, stay conscious.